off, and then maybe to exchange ideas between you. So who would like to start off? Alan, you look sort of ready to speak.
Well, okay, so I think it might be useful if I just give a very brief background to my experience.
Please do. Please, everyone, give a brief background.
So just to say, it's 6 years ago now, I had what's called a Kundalini awakening, which is in this sort of field a fairly relative common form of spiritual emergence. I was going through an unusual period of stress, which is relating to what Steve was saying, and it was superficially about work, but it's really about actually childhood trauma that was bubbling up through the surface. And I was advised to see an acupuncturist to relieve the stress. And during that session, this massive wave of energy went all the way up through me. I sort of had a William Type Blake vision of all the clouds and the golden light. Then the energy went whoosh, and I was involved, the enveloped in the golden light. And I saw the whole oneness, everything. And then it became quite tricky about 24 hours later. So to go back to the original question, which was what helps people through, just to say that in my experience, it was very extreme. I thought I was dying, which is probably to do with the ego death that Steve again was talking about. And it ended up with me being admitted to hospital for 6 weeks, which was itself a major trauma. And I mean, what didn't help, I'm not blaming anyone, but what did not help was that there was no understanding whatsoever among the medics. So I started off by explaining what was happening to me, because I knew a little bit about Kundalini, enough to be scared, but I didn't have a deep knowledge. So I started to try to say this is what was happening to me, and very soon I realized I had to shut up, because obviously they put in labels of psychosis and so forth. And I think that was all very unhelpful. And I was given a bizarre diagnosis of psychotic depression, which was very odd, because I wasn't depressed. I was just extremely anxious about what was happening to me. So what didn't help was the lack of understanding in the medical services, and also the lack of listening. So whatever I said, they would never accept it. I was anxious. They were determined to make me depressed, which I wasn't. And medication, no, it didn't really help. But what did help was actually the fact that I did have another framework, to go back to what Steve said. So I had a framework, I had some understanding what was happening to me. And then what helped a bit later on was meeting others who'd been through a similar experience. About a year later, I went to this event, Emerging Proud it was called, that was quite transformative. So I don't know if I think I'll probably shut up now. That's just, so for me, what really helped was meeting others. The psychiatric system didn't help. And I would love there to be a greater dialogue with the psychiatric system. That's what I would love to. Yeah. It would obviously take time, but then I think there needs to be that greater dialogue and understanding.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Alan. I mean, it's both a different framework, but you actually need other people. You need some sort of validation of your framework, don't you?
Exactly, and that's why it's so fantastic meeting other people, and and peer support and developing peer support. Yeah, because you get that validation. As you say, validation is so important, because if you're just being told you're crazy the whole time, even labels which are actually quite damning, and which you internalize, can make you convinced that you were ill. And anyway, yes, so validation, as you say, Isabel, is very important.
So, Neil, you're unmuted. Would you like to? I'm leaving you to last, Lewis. Is that all right?
Yeah, my name's Neil. I had a relatively easy experience through my two experiences. The first one, when I was 29 years old, Peaked very quickly. I was quite obsessed with symbols of positive and negative. And this released an image of understanding that became very visual, almost like putting your head in another world. This lasted over about 6 months, but it was so difficult because it was all a mental connection. It was all a mental thought of understanding. There was very little feeling or talk from it, apart from it being quite as if someone was talking into your head, but that was really quite weird. So after about 6 months, I decided to decrease this and gradually let that go, because I realized that the mental way of trying to understand it was so difficult. 12 years later, we sat in a circle and just sent out healing. And after about a year, I started to feel all the similar feelings, but this time it was completely different. There was more a sense of feeling that was connected to it than I thought. It became definitely a more feminine energy, and I was able to channel and relay an inner understanding and a pathway through my experience that gave me great insight into why and who I can understand the things I do, and also in a way to naturally to do it. And it was a very natural and organic process, especially as we have mentioned this a few times, but especially for me, I've always grown up with a deep spiritual interest, and I think this was really, really helpful. Even from the age of when I was 12 or 13, I had spiritual experiences. So I think this understanding helped tremendously in my experiences of being able to move through this in a more positive way.
Oh, thank you, Neil. Yeah, no, I totally agree. Trish.
Hi, I never know where to start with my story, but anyway, it was 23 years ago when I had a first peak experience after a time of I started doing healing and meditation. There's all accidental journeys of how I am. Interestingly, Neil, I had no spiritual background at all. I wasn't into it. I thought it was all a load of nonsense. And I had a peak experience during a meditation, and I ended up very quickly sectioned under the Mental Health Act. It was really, really messy. So when you talk about the experience was really brilliant. It was this I had a whole flashback of my whole life. And then I'd had a near-death experience when I was 11. So my life, I just had this flash and time became linear. It was just all crazy stuff. But anyway, and then I had this all at one with the universe. It was absolutely beautiful download of information, etc., etc. Yeah, but I just got injected lots of times and stuff and told I was ill. And then I was just fighting back. So my sort of animal instincts kicked in, and it was all just got really, really messy. And I went into remission for 23 years, really. I'd had a few episodes in that time. I have to say I didn't have a framework. I joined my local service user group to campaign against mental health services. I did find a bit of a peer group within that, but really I only found Spiritual Crisis Network in 2005. So I was already 16 years into having had my experience until I found a peer network and it was just like a miracle. Like, oh my God, I could just speak at ease about these things, because I've always really filtered it, independence of who I'm talking to. Because alongside that, I've also worked in mental health services for 29 years. So there's a conflict. This is why the stories get so long and windy. But so last year I had a really stressful life event, and I had a re-emergence. And going into the hospital system, it was worse than it ever was. Really, this time, I mean, we had COVID and stuff, but really, I had felt 24 years ago there may have been, I don't know, it was a much more humane system than it is in recent times. So that was really shocking. Now, when I was in hospital this time, I didn't mention it at all. I knew they were quickly telling me I was bipolar and I needed to take medication. And in fact, they decided I'd been bipolar for 24 years, which I had been living easily for the 24 years. But anyway, that's what they decided. And that I was in complete denial of this bipolar condition. But obviously I chose not to take their medication. And it was quite interesting being on a ward, because that's an environment I'm really familiar with. But the thing that I just knew straight away is not to even in the slightest bit talk to them about my idea of it being a transformative spiritual one. It was just put my nose down, get out of the place, pretend to take their medication, go along with them. And then I only got chilled out really by just sort of chilling out on my patients really on the ward, because that's just such familiar territory to me. So that's what kept me grounded. So that's kind of where I am. And yeah, I've been volunteering with the Spiritual Crisis Network. So we do get to hear what's going on for a lot of people. And I suppose a lot of people are very slow, long burning ones. Mine have always been completely spontaneous. They seem to have there's the peak experience, and I can see something for a couple of weeks where I'm much more aligned. And then it sort of drifts away and I get on with ordinary life, and it's just a bit in the background. Sometimes I can't feel it at all. Other times I'm like, oh, there it is. That's me.
Oh, thank you, Trish. Trish's amazing experience, but the two of us have written a book chapter. The book's not out yet, but watch out for it. It's all there. So the tips here seem to be, you might end up in the mental health services, but don't, for goodness sake, tell them what's going on as far as you're concerned, or I think you'll kind of never get out. Which suggests there is, we in Spiritual Crisis Network have a lot to do in educating the world. So great, so many people are here today. So Lewis, you come from the other side, but a balanced look at the other side. What are your thoughts on all this?
Well, a couple thoughts. I think what North American Indigenous culture can offer is the awareness of the importance of connectedness with other people and with more than humans, other than humans. And to me, it seems that the crisis part seems an artifact of alienation from others and from nature. And in the face of that, when stress is overwhelming or energy suddenly intrudes, there's no support system to buffer it, and people enter into a state of disorganization and crisis. And in North America, among people who are living within intact traditional communities, there's everyone has an elder, and elders have altars. And in the Lakota language, it's called a Teoshpie, which is the people who follow a particular elder and his altar or her altar. And there's always a support network. So there's always people to call, and who are also in the same spiritual persuasion, one might say. And I think that's really different from non-Indigenous mainstream culture. And I think it makes it hard. And, we see the side effects of mainstream derived people trying to throw themselves into Indigenous spirituality without a mentor and without a guide, and getting diagnosed as psychotic. And I think it's something that the conventional world could learn from Indigenous societies is, you need a teacher, and you don't mess with this stuff without support and without a teacher. There's a philosopher in Frankfurt, Hartmut Rosa, who's written some books. His first book was Acceleration, his second book was Alienation, and his third book is Coherence, or Resonance, sorry. And I think that Eurocentric society is in a state of alienation to some degree now, and movements like yours are trying to drive it toward resonance, and in a state of resonance, then it's harder to fall apart and to become disorganized. And I'll just say a couple things about conventional psychiatric services. I don't think they're going to listen to you, and I don't think they're going to change. And it's really a philosophical commitment to materialism, reductionism, positivism, empiricism, and and there, there's a joke that says it all, which is that psychiatry is the only field in which the customer is always wrong.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it was funny because you reminded me of Trish reminded me of I was in ceremony with some men, some Indigenous men, and we were talking about, as one of the pauses, and we were talking about what happens in a Uipi ceremony. And one of the men said, "Oh, you can't talk to white people about that. They'll think you're crazy." And I thought, well, I guess it's the same for psychiatrists. You can't talk to psychiatrists about your transpersonal experiences because they'll know that you're crazy. Because that's the perspective. And I do think that there's some of us who are nibbling away at the edges of the field. I present every year at the European Psychiatry Association. I don't get a big venue because it's too weird, but I get a little venue, and a few people come, and we have some interesting conversations. And this year, for the first time, we have a 90-minute talk at the American Psychiatric Association. So there's 3 of us who will be there talking about Indigenous perspectives on mental health, and that's a first. We've never broken into the American Psychiatric Association in such a way before. So so maybe there's maybe there's some hope. I'd like to think there is. If we survive climate change, maybe there's hope for surviving psychiatry too.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yes, actually, that I'll just interpolate there. I've twice been asked to speak. The Royal College of Psychiatry in the UK has spirituality special interest group, and they've twice asked me to speak. And they say what I say is really is challenging to them, but they did listen. So, but I think I've worked in psychiatric inpatient units and that sort of thing for over 12 years. And there are people further down inside, a lot more teams of nurses and that sort of thing where you can make a difference, and then maybe sort of gradually from the bottom up, I would say, to work on that. But that's let's bring in Neil, Trish, or Alan. How would you like to react to?
I was going to pick up one thing because I actually work with GPs and psychiatrists, and they're my colleagues, and I have expressed it to them. It might be over a drink down the pub, and they are very accepting, and they find it fascinating, and they love to talk to me about it.
Yeah.
To work, they put a different hat on. And I wonder if I was the patient sitting in front of them, telling them that story, how they may judge it. So it's interesting. And I think actually I have to say, working in mental health services, you don't get many people who self-describe themselves. I meet a lot of people, but I had already thought when I was working as a nursing assistant up on wards, watching people in altered states of consciousness, even though I had no framework for it, I was thinking, this is just not science. There's far more to this. There's something. And when people are hearing voices and stuff, and I'd already sort of been thinking that. But I don't know that psychiatry. Most people, I think, who have these. I got forced into the mental health system, but I think most people intuitively, instinctively know not to go near psychiatry, and it's just such a shame, because I think there could be I do accept that I got discombobulated, is what I call it, but who wouldn't, given what a powerful experience I'd had. But yeah, find a safely held space. And as my colleagues at SEN know, in my last episode, my safely held space became the local pub, which was quite interesting. I just integrated and nobody was really noticing that much, but I knew I was way beyond drinks. So, but yeah.
Yes. Neil, you look ready to speak.
Yeah, I think it's important that we also look at the procedures that when people do go through these things, yes, not hopefully not go to be in hospital, but to find ways by connecting to us, connecting to outside frameworks for which they can get the help. One of the fascinating things that I know from with the Zoom groups and everything else within SEN is that there's such patterns of people's connections through Kundalini, through awakenings of different processes, that they're so similar to everyone else's, that if people share these and are able to talk to each other, they will so much get a reassuring view and an understanding that will help them find a way to ground their experience and definitely get a more positive outcome from it.
Absolutely. And of course, Neil, you and other people in Spiritual Crisis Network are doing a fantastic job holding. We always had peer support groups, but now that they're on Zoom because of the pandemic, they are so much more accessible to people, aren't they? And and Alan, you've led a support group as well. Does anyone want to?
Yeah, just to say something about that. I mean, there is this. I say project, but movement emerging proud, and I got involved with that. So did Trish, and there was really fantastic training to enable people to run their own peer support groups. That's sort of run its course in some ways. But personally, I've been working with someone, supporting someone, and we've started about 2.5 years ago now a Kundalini collective. So we got about nearly 100 members, and we have regular Zoom calls. We share information on the website, and we have occasional face-to-face meetups in London. It's UK based, but people obviously come from all over the place. And I do think peer support is, for me, the best way forward. But I suppose I think about two different things. I think about how we can actually, in a way, develop our own systems of support outside the mental health services, and how we can publicize that better, how more people can actually know about the various support that is available. Then at the same time, what can we do to try to have this dialogue with mental health services? So, for instance, if mental health services would agree to have information on the Spiritual Crisis Network and other peer support on the wards, for instance, or if the GPs would actually see that as actually something valuable, that could be really important. So I see the way forward, really trying to bring that two-pronged thing, developing our own systems of support, but looking at how can we have that dialogue with mental health services. I mean, I agree with Lewis. The problem with mental health services is that it's a representative of the whole materialistic, in a way, mad world that we are living in. And that psychiatry takes, it reduces the individual to like a machine, this materialistic machine. But as Trish was saying, I'm sure a lot of people within the services actually realise how this reductionism is actually a form of madness itself. So I think there is the opportunity for dialogue, but it's just trying to find out how to do it. Other ways in.
Thanks, Alan. I just see Annalisa has got her hand up.
Yes, I had a question for all of you, but maybe particularly for Dr. Mehl-Madrona. I was, as a positivist philosophical system, how is psychiatry then dealing with the most recent research about psychedelics, which is, positivist, as in it's been done in research university centers, and they are trying to demonstrate that psychedelics can cure depression, it can cure addiction and many other things, because the step from a psychedelic trip to an awakening experience isn't that far. And a lot of indigenous cultures use those substances to achieve spiritual, altered states of consciousness. So we're basically going in a circle, so to speak. So that's positivist. I mean, it's evidence. And then the other thing is, I think that Steve Taylor's research is also very important because he's bringing positive evidence to not just transpersonal psychology, but to all psychology, that these experiences are shared by more people than is recognized, and they bring transformation and they are spiritual. So I read recently an article on the Transpersonal Psychology Journal that complained about transpersonal psychology doing a lot of theory, but not enough empirical studies. And I think Steve is addressing that, and I'm sure there are other psychologists that are doing the same.
So there's general interest in psychiatry about any drug that can be manufactured and administered. There's tremendous profit potential in drugs of any kind, of all kinds. Most of the psychedelic research has combined small doses of psychedelics with psychotherapy, and not necessarily pushing the person toward, a spiritual crisis, but moving toward a little bit more openness to alternate experience. And I'm reminded of a conversation I once had with some Huichol people, and I was asking them about how they handled the gringos coming south who wanted to do peyote with them. And they said, well, we don't let them have medicine for at least a year because they have to learn all the stories and the songs before they can, have a good experience with the medicine. They have to learn how to dialogue with the medicine and how to address it and sing with it and things like that. And, I have occasionally participated in the ketamine infusion enterprise, and I'm not so impressed that it's all that effective, though psychiatry is tremendously excited about it because it's highly profitable. You bring people in, you put in an IV, you've got, all of these people standing by, you run an infusion. Wow.
Yeah, but it's also intractable depression that they're using.
Yeah, we're using it on intractable depression, and occasionally some people do get better, but I don't see it as the panacea that maybe the public thinks that it is.
Yeah, there's more to transformation than injecting somebody.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And we do get a lot of emails from people who do want to take this route, and some of these do turn out positive, but there are also a lot of negatives. People go through very extreme experiences after this, because again, the preparation, like Lewis just said, is really important. But obviously it always has to be looked at very cautiously, whatever you do.
I think modern capitalist society is looking for the shortest road to get somewhere, And the shortest road might also be the steepest road. And you might not want to go straight up the face of the mountain. You might prefer to walk around it in circles and have a little bit easier journey.
Now, we will need to move into, we've already actually started the Q&A, but the more general, but I want to give a chance for, first of all, I just want to pop in and say something I was going to put in earlier, but lots of interesting things happen, which is a balance. That we've said a lot of very critical things about psychiatry and about don't for goodness sake go to hospital and that stuff. But unfortunately, in our society, it is a reality that where there is real risk, where somebody is really not functioning and there's nobody around to keep them safe, we do have to, in the Spiritual Crisis Network, direct them towards the mental health services, because the first thing is to survive, and risk is a reality in this area. So the fact that we are, saying a lot of negative things about mental health services doesn't rule out us advising in the height of the crisis that we might direct people there. But we will always say, once you've got through the height of the crisis, you can start to make sense of it in your own way. You can take your own way forward with it, in precisely the way that Trish and Alan, I think, are great shining examples of that. You were held by horrible services at the time, but you've survived and you've gone forward to see it in a completely different light. So I thought that point was important to make. So before we open up to general Q&A, from the four of you, any more points you'd like to make?
I would just add to what you said, Isabel, because obviously I have two hats. I'm a clinical team leader, mental health team. I was working in GP surgeries for 3 years. If you turned up at that GP surgery, you'd have got me. So never to underestimate, there are pockets of places within mental health services where this is accepted. I think we always tend to think in the Spiritual Crisis Networks, what's really needed is benzos and sleep, but they go straight for antipsychotics, and that's the problem. But that's a tricky, like for me last time, I had everything lined up. I had GPs that were colleagues, really good one who could support me. I had Spiritual Crisis Network, which were absolutely brilliant to have a bit of peer support. Nothing could save me once the ship started sailing into my spiritual realms, which I was really, really enjoying. It was just the back of a police van. Place of safety, that's a seclusion room. That fucked it all up, excuse my language. But that's a balancing act. What I know, because I've seen one of my colleagues at work who's a peer, I've seen her going through it, and it's scary to witness and know exactly what to do. And we obviously, Steve's talked about grounding, all of them core things that we already know sometimes don't feel like they're helping. You just have to stick with it, I think. But it's hard to know how to really support somebody in their peak experience, really.
Yeah. Yes.
Just to add that, I mean, I think something that a lot of us would say is needed, but it's very hard practically to set up, is what's been called safely held places.
Yeah.
So somewhere, preferably a nice place in nature, which was where there were people there, so staff, who understood these experiences and could just really hold someone for a month or so until things settled down. I mean, that would be the ideal thing. But the reality is that, as you say, when people are really going through an intense experience, at the moment, the only place to be held is within the psychiatric services. I mean, ironically, like Trish, I worked in mental health as well. I worked in mental health through the 90s and early 2000s in the community, setting up community mental health projects that were all user-led. And the whole perspective was from the service user, enabling people to concentrate on wellness, not illness, and the wellness within, not just the illness. And I suppose I'm going to do one more rant. I'm not anti-mental health services. It's just, if only people would listen. It was so ironic because I was involved in setting up these user-led projects, and we had people in a learning project, people being through mental health services, teaching, doing the whole curriculum for all the courses we did, and people went on to college and everything from that project and into work and whatever. But the whole ethos was listening to people, starting where that person is. In social work terms, going from person-centered. And if only psychiatric services could be person-centered, that would be a huge journey forward. So I think that's a message. If only psychiatrists had more training in being person-centered and actually listening to what people say, and rather than just in a way pathologizing what people say.
Yeah, no, I think the whole thing about having to put people into boxes, as opposed to one of my watchwords is taking the experience seriously, addressing the experience, what it means, what it's saying. And yeah, to add, I mean, certainly my work is about getting teams to think holistically and to work, and there is more. At the primary care level, there is certainly more of that going on. It's more difficult to get it in at the acute level, but I'm trying with that too.
I think that we being Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness, which is serves the 5 Indigenous nations of Maine, where I live. I think we're succeeding to some degree through our crisis services in keeping people out of hospital. And, we use as low a dose of medication as we can to keep them out of hospital. And we have crisis units where they can go to avoid the emergency unit. And we're just in the process of creating a house where they can stay for some longer period of time to avoid the emergency department and the hospital, because we're not really happy with how the emergency department treats our people. And we'd like to have something that buffers them from the emergency department more effectively than even what we have now. But the difficult thing is we can do some of this because we're Indigenous nations, we get grant money and federal funding. But outside of that arena, there's no money in the United States, at least. Windhorse, which Mirabai mentioned, is very expensive. We have places where people can go for alternatives to the psychiatric system all around, but they range around $20,000 a month, US dollars. And most of our people, they don't have that kind of money. The other thing I wanted to mention is the whole idea of safety plans and advanced directives.
Yes.
And I think that's really important, because when people start to go off the rails, they lose their judgment. And to have an advanced directive that their friends can read to them, that says, when you start acting like this, you want me to sit on you and prevent you from taking your clothes off in the middle of the street. Or some such thing similar that would get you put into hospital. And I mean, that can make a huge difference. And who talks a lot about that is Karen Taylor and Ron Coleman, from the UK. And Ron tells a marvelous story about getting out of hospital and his friends actually sitting on him for a week to keep him from getting put back into hospital. Detoxify from all the drugs and etc. Those kind of things. So I think these safety plans and network of friends are really important.
No, that's a really good point. Neil, Michael has got his hand up. So if I let Michael in and then bring you in, Neil. Michael, would you like to? Yeah.
Hi there. It's kind of a question. I work with the NHS, and I work with what used to be called the chaplaincy service, Heart and Soul. One of the things, a week before the lockdown started, we kind of had like a conference. We discussed things like the power threat, meaning PTFM, if you want to call it that. So one of the things that we were trying to do in there was, incorporate spirituality and have conversations with psychiatrists and stuff like that about it. And I was quite interested. And also, after that, in the summer last year, at the end of the summer, I myself, because I have my own lived experience as a peer worker, went through kind of a little bit of a crisis and kind of went into hospital. And I'm hearing lots of different things about psychiatry and stuff like that. But it was quite helpful in the fact that I went very, very deep into a reality, and I needed that help to kind of come back. And I found it quite interesting that I did get that help, and it's been a positive thing. So incorporating those two together, I think, a lot of people have said, incorporating what the psychiatrist and the psychologist do, incorporating that together. I think it's one of those things that, a lot of people, need, and a lot of people, would appreciate. So doing work in that kind of area, and people in mental health and spiritual stuff face stigma, and I think it's the same kind of thing I'm hearing with the stigma against the kind of psychiatry and different things and being on the wards. So it's I think it's moving in the right direction, but I think we need to find ways to incorporate and have decent conversations with and kind of change the system. So that's part of what we're thinking about doing. So I think
excellent,
quite a positive thing. So it's so I think a lot of people here might be getting together and kind of thinking about how we can have these conversations, and I'm wondering if anyone would like to kind of help us kind of move forward with this. I'd be appreciative if anyone out there might be able to help. So and just another quick question, Lewis, in tribal societies they usually have different ages, so about 1 to 4 you're a child, and then you kind of move up a little bit at different stages. I'm wondering, that's kind of disappeared from the way we live today. So I'm kind of thinking there's stages of kind of development, spiritual development. You have the youngsters, the children, where kind of some people get circumcised at age 13 and stuff like that, and moving up. I'm wondering, do you have any ideas on that? And kind of, Lewis, and how we can maybe bring that back into different.
It is returning to some Indigenous communities the practice of young people going on vision quests, and rites of passage into adulthood, and these ceremonies are being brought back, and culture camps where kids learn the spirituality as well as other practices. And at least in North American Indigenous cultures, the spirituality is not something apart from everything else. It's integrated with everything else. And I don't really know what's happening in mainstream culture that could parallel this. I'm just more aware of what's happening in Indigenous country, but it seems that we need to do something to counter the alienation that is so rampant in modern capitalist culture. And I think whatever we can do to bring people together to connect with each other is going to be really valuable.
Thank you. No, thank you both, Michael and Lewis. Yeah. Mia, you got a question?
Yeah, sorry, I keep putting my hand up and down because I'm not sure it is a question really, but I suppose I just wanted to share my sort of reactions really, more than anything else. So Yeah, this is so interesting to me, so fascinating. It's kind of, you know, you talked about having a framework to put this all in, and the framework for me is coming now. And the whole kind of spiritual awakenings kind of all throughout my life have kind of, I've kind of wandered about with them. So I've been in the, you know, bipolar, all of that, been through hospital many a time. Anyway, I have trained as a counsellor myself now. And I've actually got a job with Oxfordshire Mind as a wellbeing worker. So I'm in GP surgeries, working one-to-one with people, and it's sort of a mix of social prescribing, counselling, coaching. And I'm really interested in sort of working with the spiritual dimension because, well, because it's been a massive just transformation for me. And, you know, in my experiences in hospital, trying to talk to the chaplain about things that have been all very difficult, not being allowed to, you know, even go to church, even though at that time I wasn't really a member of any kind of religion as such. I just think, you know, I'd love to be able to work with people in this sort of very base role. I mean, it's, you know, not a highly paid job or anything like that, but I am coming into contact with people who are just struggling, and I just would really like to be able to have those skills to work with people if I sort of sense that they want to, you know, that side is kind of coming through, if that makes sense. I don't want to force anyone into anything. But as well, I've come across quite recently and started doing some training in, I don't know if anyone has come across the internal family systems IFS model.
Yeah.
But it really intrigues me, and I want to train, and I'm integrating that model into my sort of separate therapy work, because I volunteer as a counsellor with another organisation. I want to sort of build my own kind of private practice and sort of integrate kind of counselling, IFS, coaching, you know, spiritual transformation somehow. But yeah, internal family systems, I really like the fact how it opens up this space for the spiritual side to come in if people want to. And it's been a massive help for me. It's given me a sort of framework to kind of let that experience of kind of God come into things, or, you know, self-energy. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling on a bit.
And yet, no, that sounds highly relevant. I just nip in that, in fact, I mean, my way of making sense in mental health always opens the door for spirituality. It doesn't force people to talk about it. And that is something that I'm now getting, certainly in our area, those primary care networks. I'm doing training with all the peer workers and the social prescribers and all the new people who are being brought in, which is a great, you know, development. It's not often that we get good developments like that. And, you know, getting people to look holistically at individuals and bring in the spiritual dimension and the connectedness. Yeah. Neil, you looked as if you were just about to say something.
Yeah, I know we're probably coming to the end. I don't know how long to go. But one of the things I wanted to briefly say, first of all, thank you, Lewis. Would you be able to put in the name of the books that you did earlier? You mentioned a person, you mentioned a book, and also as much information as you can on the chat. That would be brilliant. If I could just say, one of the aspects for me that's always through all the Zoom groups I do, and from listening to people like Trish, like Alan, from their experience through to my experience, I can see from an entirely different perspective. The things that help me, I can see them as some of the things that SEN talk about all the time, i.e. grounding. My experience was to let this be as organic as possible. So roots coming out of my feet, lights coming out of my head, letting this try to be as much organic as possible, but also in regards to when we're going through these crises, to try and use as kind of words towards ourselves as possible. So rather than saying we're blocking something off, we're just slowing something down or keeping something at bay, we're just holding fast. So to use the words within our thought patterns to try to slow our process down through this is really helpful. And also, to talk about it. When you're talking to someone about your experience, even though sometimes it can heighten and make the anxiety feel worse or back again, it's really important, because this is also a form of grounding, and obviously then it's a form of release.
Absolutely, totally endorse all of that, Neil. We do have time for more questions, so do people come up with have we got any more questions from our audience out there?
Can I just go back a bit?
Oh yeah, Trish, yeah.
What Mike had been saying about finding a hospital actually useful, it made me think, I just happened to go through a really harsh hospital experience.
Yeah.
I actually believe it's part of the bigger journey of the whole of what I went through, because I do work in mental health services. I think it's like, it would never have been right if I'd gone through really, as a colleague, I should have been going to a private hospital anyway, but on that particular night, 3 people turned up via the police. So if I'd have had a cozy, comfortable mental health experience, I don't think it would have made me what I am, if you know what I mean. That's not to say that there are not people who can have useful experiences. That's all I want. I don't want to become all anti-psychiatry, and I'm critical, but I do think there are genuine people and they're trying their best, and a lot of the time it's lack of their own knowledge. How are they expected to understand when they've got no framework for it? So they're like, well, every other person is bipolar, so how am I differentiating from you to them? Oh, you're the 10th person today who turned up and said they were Jesus Christ. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. So there's limitations. I think education, training, I've been tipping away all the time I'm on a one-to-one basis with loads of people, spreading the news, but making people think more broadly about it. But yeah, I just wanted to go back a bit on that, because otherwise we're giving an impression that people should really, really avoid mental health services. But
no, I agree, Trish. And I think providing training to mental health services directly is something we want to do again. We had a grant to do that some time ago, but we haven't recently been very successful in getting grants. So anybody out there who is good at getting grants and can help us, we could, do more outreach, do more if we were a little bit more, a little bit less. A lot of people run ragged, but yeah. Any questions out there? Anybody else want to come in? What's in the chat? Anybody, if you put up one of those yellow hands, we can find you and bring you in. Questions to any one of us? Yes, Marie. Unmute yourself.
Thank you. I was just wondering if I missed something. I just saw on the chat that Louis Mehl-Madrona mentioned polar bears. Did I miss? I was very curious.
That's what we call bipolar. We call them polar bears.
In the winters, and I was, what's going on with those polar bears?
Yeah.
I wanted to add that I think, really the shift that we need to move toward, which is a major shift, is to make medication second tier. And
absolutely. Yeah. Totally.
As long as you take your medication, we'll tolerate you're doing almost anything. But, I think if we responded first with human kinds of things, and second with medication, when I was in training, it was different. There was a really popular book called Unbearable Affect, and the idea was that medications were used in as low a dose as possible to make unbearable affect bearable, so that the person could do psychotherapy. And that shifted to medications. Now they're their primary treatment, and everything else is fluff, which is not how we once upon a time thought about this.
No, I agree. I mean, in my experience, everybody panics when somebody doesn't want to take their meds. There was a randomized controlled trial of psychotherapy without medication, but it doesn't seem to have been followed up much. I do wish that would be more pursued, certainly. Yeah.
Well, and the problem with the randomized controlled trial way of thinking is that psychotherapy takes longer.
Mm.
And I think the effects are more long lasting,
Yeah.
more permanent, and you know, more conducive to relapse prevention. There was a study comparing psychotherapy to medication, and psychotherapy only did equal to medication at 16 weeks, and by 24 weeks was superior. This was for depression, not for psychosis. But the relapse rate was 8% in the psychotherapy group and 42% in the medication group. And you know, the problem with demanding randomized controlled trials is that they're so expensive that they rarely last more than 8 weeks. And medication is always going to win in the first 8 weeks. And I think we need to move more toward, well, really what Steve Taylor is doing, which is life story research, you know, collecting narratives, looking at how things unfold across a person's life cycle. And, you know, the mainstream doesn't see that as valid data yet. You know, so there's a lot of challenges out there for us.
Yes, we need to change the narrative, don't we? That is our brief, is to change the narrative out there. No small task. So I'm wondering, unless anybody's got a final bit they'd like to put in from the panel, it looks. Oh, Michael, you've got a hand up again.
Just one quick question. I've seen somewhere that there's a change, a thing called a spiritual emergency, and I think they'll use the DSM thing, the diagnostic manuals and stuff like that. I'm just wondering, does anyone on the panel have any information about, you know,
well, there's a
diagnosed?
spiritual in DSM, certainly DSM-4. What's he called? David Lukoff managed to get spiritual problem put into DSM as a differential diagnosis. I know David Lukoff, and we've had talks about this. I think the problem with that is, it's making a differential diagnosis between an illness and something which is a spiritual problem, which is validating the idea that these sorts of experiences are an illness, which I would quarrel, but that's a huge topic that I think we're just about landing up at lunchtime, so it's probably not one to open up now.
I can add to that.
Yes.
If anybody could do it, I could challenge mental health services to overturn my diagnosis. The knowledge.
Yeah. Well, individuals can do that, but what we want to do is change the system.
Yeah, but I tried to do it, and I could not do it. So I'm just saying.
Yeah. If anyone could do it. No,
my local team refused to overturn my diagnosis.
Yeah, I think I'm very aware that it's something we don't want to get into in the Spiritual Crisis Network. We don't want to, be used to get into arguments. We want to be used to change the paradigm, basically. So, shall I, Neil, you want to say something?
No, I'm fine.
No, fine. Okay, so I think, folks, 12:30, it's lunchtime. You've got a fantastic afternoon with all the research that's taking us in this direction that's going to change the narrative. And I'm afraid I've got something else I got to go to, but I'll say goodbye and thank you so much thank you, Lewis. You brought in
Thank
a
you.
whole other dimension, a whole other, energy and what have you, and vision, which is great. And thank you so much, my lovely colleagues, Trish, Neil and Alan, who are helping keep the show on the road in our little bumpy spiritual crisis network, trying to see that there is always somebody to be on the rota.
Well, we have training coming up soon.
Yes, we've got training coming, 23rd of April. So if you want to get involved, look at our website. And again, if you want to be in a support group, a Zoom group or something, just go email in and get in touch with us. So I'll say goodbye and have a good lunch, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Lewis.
Thank you, Lewis.
Thank you so much, Lewis. Yeah.
Thank you for having me.